right. Hello, everyone. I will pass it over to Alyssa to kick off our event.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. My name is Elisa, and I will be your host this morning. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful and insightful time. This event is brought to you by Decode, and for those of you who are just joining us for the very first time, Decode is a nonprofit community with roots from UC Berkeley and Stanford, with a mission to decode the future of work for students and alumni. Over the past 5 years, Decode's annual conferences have hosted numerous notable speakers, including founder and CEO of Zoom, board member of Tesla and SpaceX, CEO of Y Combinator, and CEO of Google X, among many others. Our virtual conference last October had generated 1.4 million views across 44 countries, and that prompted us to start hosting virtual events with executives and industry experts, just like today's session, on a regular basis since 2020. For any of you who would like to get more involved with us, volunteering or discussing any particular partnerships, please do email us at join@decode.build. Our network of volunteers and alumni have gone on to renowned companies, including A16Z, Sequoia, Y Combinator, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, FANG, ByteDance, and NASA, among others. For more information, you can subscribe to our emails or contact join@decode.build, and I repeat, join@decode.build. Now for today, if you have any questions for our speaker, you can send them in via Zoom chat. We will try to go through as many questions as possible, but due to time constraints, we might not be able to cover them all. For those of you selected to join the roundtable, there will be a Q&A after the session, so please stay and wait to be invited to the breakout room. If you are interested in attending the roundtable discussion but did not apply on Eventbrite, please stay behind after the Fireside chat and send me a message, and we will try our best to squeeze you in the session. As for today's session, we are excited to welcome Stani Kulechov, founder and CEO of Aave. Stani was studying law at the University of Helsinki when he first began learning about smart contracts and the Ethereum blockchain network. This led to an exploration on how blockchain technology could impact the traditional finance system. In 2017, Stani released ETHLend, one of the first DeFi dApps which allowed peer-to-peer digital asset transactions. Stani has made it his mission to create tools for an open, transparent, and equitable financial ecosystem through various decentralized financial software protocols, most notably the Aave protocol. The session will be moderated by Shvo Chen, who is a general partner at IOVC, where she invests in startups powering the future of work, as well as faculty at UC Berkeley, where she teaches entrepreneurship and blockchain. If you have any questions for our speaker, you can send them in via Zoom chat. We will try to go through as many questions as possible, but due to time constraints, again, we will not be able to cover all of them, Now let's welcome Shvo and Stani.
Thank you so much, Alyssa and Stani. A huge warm welcome to join us today. I'm really excited to have you because I'm sure all the folks here on the call know that Aave is one of the top players in the DeFi world, and you're certainly very much a thought leader in this space. So really excited to have you chat a little bit more about your personal story, as well as your thoughts on where the industry is going. In fact, this is the first time ever in history, having taught entrepreneurship and blockchain for the last 10 years, that every single class, regardless of whether or not it's related to blockchain, questions regarding blockchain always come up. So I'm sure we have a ton of folks who are really excited to ask you questions. So maybe to get us started, would love to start with your background, your personal background for how you even got introduced to the world of blockchain. And of course, specifically your story that led you to founding Aave and what you're really, really excited about.
Thank you so much, Shua, and thank you, Elisa. There's a very good introduction, and I'm so happy to hear that blockchain is now part of a bit the kind of like education a bit everywhere. I mean, there's a lot of interesting topics there, whether it's like decentralized finance or governance or the whole kind of like a NFT creator economy or social. So super excited personally. So looking to my background, so I've been building smart contract based systems for the past I would say 5.5 years. So essentially focusing on decentralized finance. And my background is in academic background is in law, so that's where I on the later stages found blockchain. But before that, I was more of a programmer. So I used to develop applications during my teen years, mainly different kinds of web apps, but later stage more fintech applications. When kind of like banking went to more towards the internet and mobile, and there was a lot of interesting innovation happening. I went essentially into law studies because I was kind of like a very savvy with the tech part, but then the rest, kind of like bigger chunk of products and the regulation was more like less, like I would say, less clear to me, and I wanted to learn more and understand. And I think like for me, like studying has always been something where I want to learn like new things. I don't want to learn things that I already know. And during my end of my studies, I wanted to use technology to make agreements more commercial agreements more efficient. And I was looking into AI. I was very curious about that, other technology, and especially blockchain. And when I found Ethereum smart contracts, that kind of started to make a lot of sense that, you know, with immutable code, you could create, or community governance code, you could create a lot of interesting use cases, especially towards finance. And blockchain started a bit more from the finance perspective, because there was Bitcoin as value transfer value transfer network, and now a bit more of a like kind of like value storage network. So essentially, all the use cases were around finance. So what we did, we built first iteration of the kind of like Aave protocol. We were called back then ETH short from Ethereum lending. That was when decentralized finance as a movement was very narrow. There was probably you know, there was one decentralized exchange back in those days in 2016 and then beginning of 2017, and you started to see like more DeFi ecosystem to grow, and that was part of our like first applications. And I think the whole space has grown as an ecosystem since those days, I would say. So we basically built it. A protocol that is today known as Aave protocol, and it's pretty much one of the leading DeFi protocols out there. Essentially allows anyone to supply cryptographic assets and see them grow in interest, and then of course use those assets to draw liquidity of other form of assets. Currently deployed in 7 different networks. Ethereum, Polygon, Avalanche, layer 2 such as Optimism, Arbitrum, and I think Aave community has always been a bit of like cross-chain and inclusive when it comes to various different networks. But to say that we are more of like Web3 builders than like DeFi builders, so we focus on different infrastructure and services that we can build in Web3 that are very meaningful and create a lot of impact. And we have been focusing now on building a decentralized social graph, kind of like a decentralized social media protocol, which is the Lens protocol. We have a bunch of other interesting things on the pipeline, for example, using NFTs as a collateral. And then we have also an experimentation pod as well in the Aave. But I think like I could go on and on, so I will just leave you to ask more questions.
Yeah, no, really appreciate that perspective, because we have a lot of students and alumni who are aspiring to break into this space, whether it's starting something of their own or joining existing projects, and really, really curious to hear from your perspective. I mean, now Aave has nearly $25 billion locked up in the protocol. So obviously by far one of the leading protocols in this space. Curious to hear when you first started, what your vision was for it and how it's evolved over time, to help students and alumni better understand where they should be coming from and how their thought process can work.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was more about experimentation, because the space was very small and there wasn't much of like a usage, and many of the kind of like innovation was focused on actually building protocols that where you can build other protocols on top, and there was this like layering of horizontal I would say kind of like a adoption. So with our kind of like a goal was to try to build something where, you know, it's useful for the users. So we focused also on building very functional front end, but at the same time that we wanted to ensure that the protocol is usable by all the developers out there that are building Web3 and specifically building in decentralized finance. So I mean, we were in very beginning just pretty much experimenting and wanted to a bit innovate and see how maybe building something on smart contracts and making finance more efficient using the kind of like benefits of decentralized finance, the fact that you can interact with in a non-custodial fashion. You have the transparency that the public blockchain provides, and this composability that you build one application and you can see like a couple of applications built on top that it uses the Aave protocol and other protocols, and you see this kind of like a money Legos. So it was more of like experimentation than anything else. And over time, I would say like two things happened. Like the community started to grow, so we started to receive like more like fans that were excited about like what we were building. And another important thing is that the ecosystem started to grow. So we saw other builders from different part of the world building a new innovation in decentralized finance. And then like when you had Aave users, or even before that ETHLend users, then you had Maker users, Uniswap users, like you started to actually create a new kind of like a user group of like DeFi users, or as we call them, degens today. So that has been kind of like the evolution. So we went from just experimenting things, realizing that there is something here that is very, very valuable, better technology. There's sort of community aspect in how we govern this technology at the same time, and the share of different users. And I think this is like very valuable because I come from a background where I started Aave from university, still studying, and I actually had to go back later in my life, back to the university and finish my degree, my thesis, and it just shows that it really doesn't matter what's your background, which part of the world you're actually building. It's an open ecosystem. Everything is available there, resources, code bases. It's for you to use or build on top. So the barrier to enter is very low, but also it means that there's other folks doing the same thing as you are doing, but it shouldn't be scary because end of the day, everyone is just you know, supporting and in favor of like moving this ecosystem forward.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because oftentimes actually the most common question I often get from students is this question of, do I start something now, or do I go work at a large company that's relatively safe and do something else before I come back? So your perspective on this is super helpful, given that you've founded the company and then eventually later went on back to school to complete the rest of your degree. So it's a really valuable perspective to have. In fact, building on where you think things are going forward, given Aave got so much traction so quickly, there's kind of two parts of this question. One, what made you decide that going back to university to finish up your degree was the right way to go? And then two, how do you feel like your background over the last couple of years has informed you for going forward, what you're most excited about?
Yeah, I mean, for me, like I always kind of like appreciated like formal degree, in the sense that I feel that whatever you start, you should finish if you are passionate about it. And I think in some way, like legal studies have been always something that it's important to me, but also it acts as a kind of like a merit. And today it might be something else than legal studies. It might be your contribution to a DAO and finalizing that work, getting a pull-up of doing that even, and so forth. But like for me, it was very important to kind of like make that time and be able to finish the degree, because I think I kind of like owe it to myself to do that, but also I kind of like owe it to the institution where I was coming from. Now studying in the University of Helsinki, and so I come from Finland, and it's an interesting kind of like society because you know, school is completely free there, you know, all the way to universities, you know, healthcare, everything is kind of like pretty much free. And I kind of like felt also this a bit of pressure that I just want to finish it because I completed like, I would say like 95% or so. So it was just like small effort to do that, but there was like a timeline. So I had 2 months to do that and write thesis. So there was sort of kind of like urgency there. If I would maybe, if this would happen on my first grade or like second semester, maybe I don't know. I would have to reconsider what will I do. But also, I think in life, like life is long, and I think in life you have to always think about like education as being part of the life. So even at this point, I would imagine I could do some other degree at some point if I would get bored of what I'm doing now. So I will never like see education as just one stage in your life. And during your work, even in Web3, there's a lot of things that you need to analyze, research, and I think that's where most of my time goes because there's so much information coming in, relying on different groups that are making research at Aave and understanding that information and understanding where things are going towards. So that's like very, very valuable. And it's a constant kind of like a education and studying. But yeah, it's a hard decision that everyone probably has to make. But if you have that ability to finish something that you started, I definitely recommend that. And having a formal degree is a nice thing as well to have. But it's always, I think it's more of a personal choice than anything else. And it's just like something where you need to listen to yourself as much as possible. So I don't want anyone to quit their like studies after just like listening me here. So just to be clear.
Really appreciate that.
I don't want to get phone calls from angry parents.
Makes a lot of sense. I think it's a really healthy perspective to have, to see learning as a continual source of inspiration rather than like a one phase in your life you get that over and done with and you never want to do that again. So I think it's really inspiring for students and alumni to hear that perspective from you, that even if you're already running one of the largest projects in the space, that learning is still an important part of what you do day to day. And speaking of learning, the entire DeFi space has been changing so quickly over the last couple of years. Curious to hear what you're most excited about in terms of where things are going, or if there's a couple of large trends that you really see where folks can start getting involved early.
Well, there's two things, of course. Like technically, I'm very fascinated about you know, layer 2s and how people can be onboarded into the ecosystem. But second thing is the DAO aspect, I would say. So in terms of like the layer 2s, what's fascinating here is that you know, you don't need to come anymore into the Web3 ecosystem through Ethereum necessarily. I mean, there's a lot of transaction fees and so forth. So like layer 2s can be in a way where actually you could inherit the Ethereum security, but you can transact in a very, very scalable way. And the more users there are in that layer 2 rollup, you know, the more cheaper it comes. So I'm excited to see them evolving more and seeing more kind of applications where the transaction fee is so low that you can do actually build applications which you couldn't do before. For example, payments applications. You could easily do a, you know, application where, you know, someone can pay and receive payments like in shops, online e-commerce, making onboarding a bit more easier, and actually create more utility for stablecoins as well. So that's something I'm very fascinated about, and also rollups will allow to onboard and bring like Web3 utility into gaming as well, and a bunch of other things. So I'm super excited about that. The second thing is the DAOs. So in DAOs, you know, being able to participate in like the infrastructure of the future and making decisions, whether you have like actual some sort of financial stake or not, is insanely valuable. So if you think about it, like I see Web3 protocols in the same scale in the future as we would have something like HTTPS or IP protocol, where every single person on the planet could actually use a particular protocol or the whole ecosystem some way, either directly or indirectly. It might be that you're using directly Aave protocol. Maybe your parents will be using through, I don't know, some bank or fintech provider or some other way. And I think this is valuable because like if you are able to just go into those communities as a student, vote on different things, express opinions, that's like a valuable thing because you leave a kind of like a footprint into the infrastructure of technology that will be used in the future. So it's very valuable from kind of like a governance perspective, but also how they will shape how we actually have this infrastructure. So because it's not anymore companies building services, but actually we take part of what has been built as a service, making it as a public good, and letting the community to decide how it's run, and also having like separate communities if there's like forking and whatnot, and seeing how different paths different communities are taking towards. I think those two things are very fascinating, and of course, like Web3 space in general growing, expanding. So we saw creator economy getting empowered by the NFTs. So artists could basically sell directly their forks to directly to their audiences and getting empowered. And also now with the social, I think like Web3 social is something which is going to be very valuable, and especially like with Lens protocol, not to show too much, but for example, you can create a communication channel with your audience directly, and it's up to the front ends then to compete to build you the best user experience and the best kind of like algorithms too. So I think we're changing like a lot of things how we build products and services, because we approach the products from user ownership perspective, and that's been like the biggest kind of like a value, that the networks, the communities, and the protocols are user owned.
To actually build on your point on DAOs, I know you mentioned that this is one of the most exciting developments that you're excited about. And obviously, Aave has since adopted a fully DAO governance model as well. And curious to hear about your thinking throughout this process. And then what are opportunities that you think are possible now with DAOs that previously were not? And then any concerns or challenges that you feel like DAOs need to overcome?
Yeah, I think DAOs are like a completely like a separate like a topic where there is just like so many different topics and issues and innovation as well at the same time, but also like a opportunities. So I think DAOs have definitely like increased and has become like a very diverse ecosystem, and we see now like DAOs being part of various different infrastructures. So for example, the DeFi protocols, they're governed by the communities. The DAOs, they have different kinds of takeaways on how to govern these protocols, what kind of decisions to make. But then you will also have like some smaller DAOs that are focused, for example, buying the constitution or governing intellectual property of NFTs. So there's a lot of diversity, which is amazing. And also DAOs can be just a fundraising and capital allocation mechanisms. So I love where the space is at the moment, and I think there's just like so much potential. And one of kind of like things I really like is that some of these DAOs, especially like the Aave DAO, is one of those where the DAO is self-sustainable. Same, for example, for the NS DAO, where the DAO is generating yield and revenue from the protocol directly to the treasury in a way where that treasury can be reutilized by paying service providers, paying developers to build new things, and this is like a very fascinating evolvement, because there's the Aave company that we are building new things, and we can actually provide services to the DAO itself. So this is very cool, because DAOs can scale quite substantially. I mean, the Aave DAO is collecting roughly 50 million worth of assets into the treasury, and if you scale that to 10x, that could be like $500 million. So like it just showcases, like, as this protocol scales, how big these DAOs and treasuries can become. So that's exciting, and it could empower a lot of developers, but also anyone who is interested in working in Web3. So it could even happen that your first job or your first internship will be in DAO at some point. So it's cool.
In fact, this is perfect, given you have a background both in law as well as in programming. And in many ways, DAOs are at kind of the perfect intersection of the two, where at least some people are starting to say that DAOs are almost code as law, and a lot of thought goes behind into the design and governance of how these work. And curious to hear from your perspective, when you think about the future of where things are going, do you imagine a world in which we're going to leverage a lot of principles and best practices from existing company structures, or do you think that this is going to be completely different because of more of a bottoms-up driven model?
Yeah, very, very good question. I think it really depends on what the DAO is, because a DAO can be even like a multi-sig. I mean, it can be just a group of 10 people deciding things together, or it can be actually something bigger, where the Aave protocol has quite a lot of stakeholders. So yeah, I would say that there is a lot of benefits for companies in terms of like scalability of organizing work, contracting services, and doing it already in an existing infrastructure. In terms of DAOs, that infrastructure doesn't necessarily exist in the same way when we are talking about pure DAO, where there isn't like a actual legal company behind it and doing part of those decisions and so forth, and the contracting. So it's kind of like a challenging part there. But also I see that DAOs could be working as more of like trusts and treasuries that you would have like in the Aave ecosystem, like dozens and dozens of service providers that are offering, let's say, consulting services, treasury management services, development services, smart contract auditing, marketing help, and so forth. And you have this, and also you would have like sub DAOs or spin-off DAOs, where you will see some of the kind of like a budgets going into, let's say, grants and managing a sub DAO, or into a events DAO that might throw those famous Aave parties. So there's definitely like a benefits in both, but I think like the most fascinating part is the one that is new to us, which is like how DAOs could employ people in the future, or whether they will be like trusts and they just like contract work and various companies.
Absolutely. It certainly changes the way that we think about people's relationship with institutions, and whether or not we really can leverage code to automate a lot of this process. And selfishly, I definitely would love to learn more about your thoughts on DAOs, because we've been doing research in this space with a ton of my students, including Alyssa. So I'm sure they'll follow up with specific questions later on as well. But pivoting a little bit to talk a little bit more about this new emerging conversation that everybody started talking about since Facebook changed its name to Meta, which is people getting really excited about the metaverse. And depending on how you define what the metaverse is, curious to hear your thoughts on any opportunities for DeFi to interact with or intersect or to underlie a lot of the infrastructure of this new emerging metaverse conversation.
Yeah, I think blockchain itself is a metaverse, because there's all this kind of like composability and interaction, but it's more of like a value network. And I think it could kind of like point into different objects or whole different kinds of accountings of a particular, might be a particular game or an environment or anything. Like it's not only kind of applicable to the metaverse just in holding value in real world and that accounting as well. So I think where most fascinating part will come is that normally when you think about metaverse and you think about Meta, they build their infrastructure, all the way from hardware to the software. If you use games that are based on their technology, that's like, it's licensed technology. They have the IP, but the same way in Fortnite, for example, when you buy skins or you have V-Bucks, you actually don't have anything. It's in the game system. It's not something you actually own or have like cryptographic signature onto it. But like if you have if you use blockchain into those kind of like environments where every single skin that you are trading and every single asset is an NFT or some sort of like a fungible token, it brings the value actually back to the users in a way. For example, if let's say Fortnite will not function tomorrow for some reason, any developer can actually come and just create a new game and invite those assets back into the game, into the new game. So you kind of have like this like community that owns their own assets, and that's, I think, where a lot of empowerment happens, but also composability. So let's say if you buy very nice metaverse sneakers, you could actually like also wear them in multiple games. And I mean, even like if you think about it, like wearing the same things in Fortnite and Animal Crossings, that will be insane.
Absolutely. I think students and alumni are certainly really, really excited about this opportunity because we see the opportunity for a completely different level of interoperability, and it certainly is a really exciting movement. And speaking of a lot of larger institutions coming into this space, we certainly see not just technology companies starting to get more involved into the blockchain and crypto space. We see a lot of other financial institutions, a lot of other traditional players now coming into the space. Curious to hear if you think there's some key factors that can help accelerate growth in terms of what they're doing, whether or not you think these traditional institutions coming in are even a good thing, and just your thoughts on this topic.
No, I think for me, it's always fun to talk to institutions because it's just like kind of like things are very institutionalized, let's say in traditional finance, or I mean, might be even like venture capital as well. And I think it's just like so much fun to talk about technology that is in the future, and then talk to people that basically will at some point like use the technology, and you kind of know it, like, and they kind of somehow know it if they get it. But for me, it's very fascinating, and because also like many of these discussions that we have, usually we realize that the space could deserve a lot of input from finance people who work in traditional finance. There's a lot of risk professionals. There's a lot of talent out there. So I think it's kind of like an opportunity for everyone. I think the challenge is that like kind of like traditional finance is very institutionalized, and the way we're thinking and building these networks in Web3 is that there isn't an actual ownership on the protocols. It's community ownership, and everyone is a stakeholder. So it's kind of like a new thing to understand. But I think there's just a lot of opportunity, and I think there's more and more growing interest in decentralized finance because it's just a very efficient infrastructure where liquidity moves very smoothly, and I think kind of like it's just like a very competitive environment, because when you have this smart contract infrastructure where a lot of things are codified, governed by the peers in the community, there's a lot of efficiency there. And I think like institutions are definitely looking into decentralized finance, but also there's like challenges still because everything is so new to everyone. So it really takes time a bit to make breakthroughs. And what we have done on the Aave side, we created this institutional Aave ARC market where you have the same public blockchain infrastructure. So you have the market there, but there's a difference that you can actually whitelist you have so-called whitelisters that can be institutions like Fireblocks or custodians or banks that can actually whitelist user addresses, either their own custodial addresses that you hold their user funds, or direct addresses that interact, like in the case of Fireblocks. And I think it's a nice way to create a sandbox, because you can create additional compliance requirements, similar KYC requirements, and build this market actually until like you have more kind of like a clarity of what DeFi is to them and what's their strategy. And I think it's like, for me, it's more of a strategical question than compliance and anything else, because like these institutions are very big and they trade in scale, and DeFi is very small. There's just like 200 billion worth of value locked in decentralized finance, and it's just like, you know, kind of like a nothing. And then of course, like there is other infrastructure, you know, there is the Web3 social creator economy infrastructure. So there's like a bunch of other things where you see some institutional activity, mainly on the fundraising side, but still like kind of like we're very far off like actually achieved anything big yet. We'll get there.
I certainly hear you on that. We'll get there. And what do you think are the biggest things that are going to get us there? In the sense that there are some people who just get it, and there are certainly traditional finance folks who don't quite get that turning point yet. So when you have these conversations with traditional institutions, what are some of the top 1 to 3 things that you've said where they go like, I get it now?
Specifically, usually kind of like the size of the growth, that's very like good indicator, and also like the kind of like a benefits. So we have the transparency, non-custodial access, the smart contract infrastructure. So you have either immutability or community governance are very big things, I would say. And of course, kind of like, of course, the fact that you have like yield opportunities. So it's a big opportunity for many treasuries, because we are living still in a very like low interest environment in traditional finance. So it brings a lot of kind of like a eyes into the field. So those are the things that are quite important, but also I would say innovation. So because it's an open market, in the sense that anyone can come and build, you know, there's like just this huge big innovation or even like a rate of innovation going on all the time, that kind of like gathers a lot of people coming in and looking what's going on. And lastly, I would say that talent. So like as more and more folks are saying that I'm going to work, like leave my job and I'm going to Web3 and I'm going to DeFi or something else, you know, people are starting to think like, what's going on here? Like why so much talent is going towards this space? So what's the what we have there? And those are the drivers that definitely like bring a lot of attention.
I absolutely agree with your point on movement of talent. This is the first time where I have students giving up otherwise really cushy jobs at large tech firms or financial institutions and saying, well, I'm going full into Web3. And so you could certainly have a lot more faith in the future of an industry if you have very smart and talented people going in. And curious, this is, of course, more of a hypothetical question, but if you were to pursue this space as a new founder today, what would be some of the most exciting opportunities that you see now?
I would maybe like kind of like it really depends on what you're building. I think like in decentralized finance, there's definitely like things you can build, optimize. So it's definitely like not completely built up. There's sort of things to do in greater economy perspective. Social is completely new field, like Web3 social, and the innovation you can build is just like getting started. So that's one of those aspects. I would build maybe something even not related necessarily to the protocols itself. It might be a service. It might be just a very clever way to quantify risk, quantify data, and those are like, I think like there's gonna be a big like SaaS moment in Web3 at some point. So like that's something I will look into. Yeah, honestly, whatever like excites you. So like if DeFi excites, I would like go there more deeper. If it's some sort of educational part, finding like resources, like there's insane amount of things to build. It's just like finding something that you want to commit for a while, or even just like experiment. You never know.
I've certainly been waiting for the big SaaS moment in the world of DeFi, because I think that's really the moment when it's going to scale to all of these large institutions. And when you look at all of these different opportunities that are emerging, you mentioned one of them is a smart and clever way of quantifying data better. What are some of the best tools that you've used so far? And what are some of kind of the typical metric points that you look to when you try to assess the credibility of a new emerging blockchain project?
I think like I love when people over engineer and just like kind of like innovate on parts where other like maybe other projects haven't considered or left on the side. So that's very like at Aave we usually try to over engineer on the protocol side, but then oversimplify on the like more of the kind of like a user facing side. So we put like most of the heavy lifting on contracts and so forth. But I think like kind of like focusing on details is very important. Whether like I don't know what you might be building, but you know, if it's like adding features that are like kind of like built very well, you know, or the protocol really is just like well done, that it like feels that there's everything you need and it's like final. So details, quality, of course, are most important, and also like that the product is sound, that it makes sense. You know, whether someone uses it or there's demand, that's like a, you know, that depends on like what you're building, but essentially like focus on high quality, you know, products is fascinating for me.
And in the DAO space, it's very difficult to get access to data. Curious to see if you've come across any good tools, or maybe Aave's team has built this internally to track. But what are some of the key metrics that you look for when you look at some of the DAOs? Of course, how much liquidity you have locked in a protocol is kind of a good reference point, but any other metrics that you look for?
I look into also, I focus quite a lot on the governance side, because like the protocol is the product, and the governance is then, you know, how the community manages. And like the product can do a few things. Like for the governance, it can create opportunities, or it can bring bring cash flow or some other kind of like a value. But then it's up to the DAO how they use that treasury, or whether they use at all. Like there's DAOs that are just sitting on treasuries and not doing anything. And I'm looking like more of like kind of like what kind of proposals there are, like who are voting and to what extent, and you know, seeing a bit more like consensus and the landscape of the governance. That's something I'm focusing quite a lot. And recently on the product side, I'm focusing on the amount of users. So TVL is interesting to see like how much the contracts are securing funds and so forth. But for me, and like AUM perspective, but like for me, the users, the amount of users is even more fascinating. And I think this is where like layer twos and things like Polygon and Avalanche are interesting, because like you might get like a lot of new users through these new channels, because like for example at Aave, the Aave protocol deployment of Polygon has like multiple times more users than in mainnet. So it's just like it's an interesting comparison, and I think layer twos is going to also like take this another step forward. So I will like I'm interested in quantifying the amount of users these days.
Yeah, it's super fascinating that you talk about quantifying the number of users, because when we look at the governance perspective of a lot of DAOs, and you look at kind of who votes and in what kind of types or categories of proposals, we do notice that a lot of DAOs, even though they were supposed to be decentralized to begin with, a lot of them are decided by some of the largest owners of tokens who are run more by institutions. So it's a really fascinating space where you do have to look at the number of users, but then there's this really interesting intersection with how you think about governance. So curious to hear if you think, in terms of looking at the space ahead, if you feel like minority shareholders or stakeholders are going to be increasingly becoming a more influential voice, or if you feel like this is still something that is going to be determined by some of the largest token holders.
Yeah, I think of course it depends on how technically the DAO governance is working. So if it's like one token, one vote, it's going to be like very challenging. But I think like there's gonna, even in that case, like it's gonna be more on individuals, and like voting power and proposition power delegation is very good here, because like if the tendency is that everyone delegates their vote to someone, like it becomes more of like more about individuals, which is good in one way, but also like kind of like I think like smart ideas and innovations should thrive, and necessarily, you know, in bigger stakeholdings, there's not necessarily always like might not be always kind of like the case. So it's very tricky, but I would love to see more like smaller stakeholders getting involved. I know that Stanford Berkeley is actually participating in governance, and that's like an amazing movement. And I think like it's something that kind of like I would like to see more, but also like more innovation. So if there's engineers here, might be interesting to think about innovating on the current way that we vote, and maybe creating different kinds of voting mechanisms where also minorities have a lot of voice as well.
Absolutely. And if you were to envision a future that you're most excited about, would you say that you want to see more folks that are encouraged to participate, or do you think delegation is the way to go, or maybe there's something that the industry hasn't yet talked about that we should be heading towards?
Delegation definitely is one idea. Another is just like looking at kind of a bit of like voting activity and how what we had there in previously, and trying to leverage that data in voting new things. So let's say that, I mean, if there is like 200 addresses that are voting actively, maybe just distribute the governance power some interesting way where, you know, everyone has the same amount or something like that. I'm not quite sure how to do anything like that, because there's always like edge cases that you need to do. But I would definitely like to see like alternative models as well. And governance delegation, just in the fact that not only vote delegation, but if you can delegate, like, you know, there's like interest rate curves that's you know, you kind of like have to go changing like risk parameters, interest rate curves, you have to go to the main DAO and get the big quorum. But something like that could be delegated to entities that manage risk and so forth. So I think like just like delegating some of the decision making to some of the like smaller DAOs could be interesting.
Absolutely. In the interest of time, I want to make sure to give everyone who's here an opportunity to ask you questions directly. So I will ask you one last question and then open up the floor to anyone to turn on their video and audio to ask you questions directly. The last question I wanted to ask you was really just thinking ahead in terms of practical action steps for everyone who is here today, as well as for folks who watch the recording afterwards. Given that there's so much change and just an intense fluctuation of information at all times, what are some of the best ways that you follow what's happening in this space? And for thought leaders or audience members or even industry leaders, what are some of the best practices they can adopt so that they're learning about the latest developments in DeFi?
Yeah, there is so much stuff going on. So like obviously at Aave, we have people that are helping to kind of like curate the information and share it. So that has been helpful. Personally, I think just like Twitter has been very helpful on following kind of like different narratives. But I would suggest something like if you all create some sort of a Telegram group and just share resources, things that you find interesting, and also invite me there so I can get all the latest alpha as well. But that could be like interesting way where you have like a group where you share things amongst each other. That probably is a way to be very up to date.
Perfect. That is super helpful, I think, for everyone who's here today, as well as folks who watch afterwards. I think it would be really helpful for them to start hunting for the most helpful Twitter threads to follow, as well as the most interesting Telegram groups for sure. I will pass it back to Alyssa to help manage our Q&A. I know folks who might want to ask questions, but given that we have a relatively intimate group here today, since this is supposed to be the pre-recording for the event, I'll really open up the floor to allow anyone to ask questions directly, but maybe I'll pass it back to Alyssa first.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, Stani, for your time. And thank you both for such an engaging and wonderful discussion. We can start off with a Q&A right now. And should I do any concluding words at the moment, or would we go into the Q&A directly?
I think we can run into Q&A first, and then I know Stani must have a crazy schedule. So after he drops, you're welcome to run the concluding words afterwards.
Perfect. Yes. So does anyone have any questions? Please raise your hand. And if possible, you can also speak up and turn on your camera.
I know it usually takes folks a little bit of time to gear up courage to be the first question asker, but maybe, oh, perfect. We have Raquel.
Hi, everyone. Well, thank you for hosting this event, and thank you, Stani, for sharing your experience. My name is Raquel, and I would like to ask you, what do you think about, well, now that the ecosystem is growing very fast, so they are promoting, or their protocols are promoting growth per growth, just doing DAOs, launching everything. So what do you think? What is your opinion on how this could affect to how the ecosystem is gonna evolve? Because I think that doing just DAOs but without tokenomics and all the purpose behind, I don't know how it's if it's gonna be good or bad for the ecosystem. Of we are in the moment that we just need to grow and to put people in the system just to learn, and then to think about, okay, what is the best way to grow?
No, I think it's like, I've been thinking this too, like, because like usually you build protocols and then like, this is how we usually have been thinking, that we build protocols and then we give them to the community ownership, and there's a DAO. But DAOs can be like things without actually like a protocol, which means equals to me a product. So it can be also like a brand. So in Bored Apes case, you know, you commonly govern the IP of the project, but it can be just like governing a brand. And I think that's like was very interesting. But then you have like various different DAOs where you fundraise to buy something or to invest into some other things. So for me, like there definitely should be this diverse ecosystem, because like it like every single DAO that is like successful or not will just like bring more narrative to the space. Like hopefully like not like if it's like not too like big of a like mess like the DAO that happened in 2015 and so forth, 16. And like I just think like DAO should be a way to get people together, decide on things, manage things together, or just have fun, or manage a big infrastructure project like the Aave protocol. So diversity is good.
Okay, thank you very much.
I do also have a question if possible. So again, Stani, you mentioned a great point saying that DAOs can be an excellent method for really any community member to set up a digital footprint within a protocol, whether it's by voting, starting a discussion, or even just making the discussion themselves. But on the other hand, you also touched on this a little bit, there has been quite a bit of criticism regarding on-chain voting due to the token per vote method most protocols employ. So I was just wondering, do you happen to have any thoughts on the future of decentralized governance and voting, or more specifically, do you see any changes or any trends that might change the system in the near future?
Yeah, it's very interesting. There's been very challenging like DAO votes. I think one of them was recently in DeFi, like Compound's vote on listing Matic, and I think A16Z voted against it, and kind of like the idea was there that it's like regarding like security challenges, and whether it's like the bridge or the amount of validators in that network and the network token. So it's just like interesting, like kind of like how we see like position taking within the DAO ecosystem. And I think controversial votes are good because it gets a lot of they get a lot of traction and bring attention to people like that there's actually like very big decisions happening, and we need in the space more I would say kind of like folks that are looking into those matters. And there's like still a lot of issues in the proposals, because like they're actually technical, like how do we ensure that the code corresponds what's the text itself, and how the proposal is marketed and presented to non-technical audience. But I really love also like in terms of like trends is that we see kind of like sub DAOs and also like delegation of governance. For me, that's very cool, because you can make quicker decision making and just like add more trust into these smaller core units. And I think that's also like the direction Aave is taking a bit towards.
Actually, I did get, I know that we're running out of time here. I did get a few direct messages with questions. I'll lump them together, maybe, Stani, to ask you one last question. The number of questions that I got were really in the controversial voting categories, where people wanted to ask you a little bit more about what are some of the most controversial votes that you've seen take place, and typically why have they been controversial? You've already alluded to one on Compound just now. But curious if there's been a couple of types overall.
Well, there's few in Compound, just maybe not to kind of like, I mean, it's, I would say like also like in the ENS ecosystem, there's also kind of like the code of conduct, part with one of the members that was like also one of the controversial votes. So I think every community has something going on, and the most fascinating ones also is regarding the people and who are governing or have power in those DAOs, because it's just like DAOs are definitely like a new kind of like a field, and also like where to draw the limits, what kind of like what kind of things people need to vote upon. Like those are very kind of like fascinating. And of course, like in DeFi, there's always like asset listings and whatever, and they might be like controversial, but it's I think it's more of a business as usual and related to risks. It's more of like when you vote about people, whether they should be having a kind of like a significant position in that community. I think those are quite interesting. But I think if you go any DAO, there's some controversial stuff happening. So yeah.
Absolutely. Just as we would typically expect in a normal company kind of governance voting as well, there's always going to be categories of more controversial votes, and it's a matter of establishing best practices and best rules of thumb around how we want to govern going forward. So I think, Stani, your session has been super insightful and really helpful, not just for our students at Young Alumni, but also for the more experienced industry professionals who've been working for a decade plus in their respective careers, just to leave us with all this food for thought for going forward. Really, really appreciate your time with us, Stani, and I will pass it back to Alyssa to wrap up.
Thank you so much. All right, this concludes this morning's session. Thank you so much for Stani and Shuo for your time and an incredibly engaging discussion. And thank you everyone for coming. We hope that you've enjoyed this session and gained some knowledge from it. And as for the next steps, this event, I believe, might be available on YouTube. So we will share the link via email with everyone. So please subscribe and follow us on YouTube. I will drop the link below. Thank you so much for coming, and have an excellent rest of your day.
Thanks so much,
Thank you so
Stani.
much.
And if there's anything that we can ever do to be helpful, whether it's research that we're doing or anything else where perspectives from Berkeley and Stanford might be helpful, please feel free to reach out to us anytime as well.
Definitely. And everyone, if you want to catch me, so you can find me on Twitter, and my DMs are open if you need any help and have any additional questions. And I want to thank everyone for being here today.
Thanks so much, Stani. Take care and have a great
Thank
one.
you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.